The conference room was packed for our weekly staff meeting. 23 people crammed around the oval table, laptops glowing, coffee cups steaming. I was halfway through my quarterly report when Evan Cole suddenly stood up. His chair scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. "Actually, let's stop there," he said, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. The room went quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Evan was the director's son, 28 years old with an MBA and 2 years of experience. He'd been promoted to department head 6 months ago, right over 3 senior managers who'd been here for decades. "I have an announcement," he continued, walking around the table like he was giving a presentation. "Effective immediately, we're terminating Patricia Wells for incompetence and failure to meet performance standards." The words hit me like ice water. Patricia Wells. That was me. 15 years with this company. 15 years of perfect reviews, client success stories, and late nights fixing everyone else's problems. The room was silent. Dead silent. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. 23 pairs of eyes stared at me, some shocked, others looking away in embarrassment. Closed my notebook slowly. My hands weren't shaking. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. "I understand." Security appeared at the door like they'd been waiting outside. 2 men in navy uniforms with serious faces and clipboards. Evan gestured toward me with theatrical authority. "Please escort Ms. Wells from the building," he said loudly. Too loudly, like he wanted everyone on the floor to hear. I gathered my things methodically. My notebook, my coffee mug, the small plant from my desk that someone had brought me. People watched me pack like I was performing surgery. Some looked horrified. Others seemed relieved it wasn't them facing this humiliation. The walk through the office felt endless. Past the cubicles where I'd trained new hires. Past the conference rooms where I'd saved countless projects. Past the break room where I'd celebrated birthdays and promotions with people who now couldn't meet my eyes. Evan's voice followed us down the hall. "This is what happens when people can't adapt to new leadership," he announced to anyone listening. "Sometimes you need fresh blood to make real decisions." The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. As I stepped inside, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A missed call from an unknown number. The security guards stood beside me, uncomfortable with their role in this theater. The elevator descended, carrying me away from 15 years of my life. My apartment was too quiet. The silence pressed against my ears after years of constant office noise, ringing phones and meeting chatter. I sat on my couch, still holding my cardboard box of belongings. The shock was starting to hit. 15 years reduced to 5 minutes of public cruelty. I replayed Evan's words over and over. Incompetence. Failure to meet performance standards. The accusations were so vague, so generic. Almost like he'd read them from a script. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. Muscle memory from years of checking messages at home. Most of my access had already been cut, but my personal archive still worked. That's when I saw it. An email thread forwarded to my personal account 3 weeks ago. I'd been cleaning out my inbox and must have saved it without thinking. The subject line read, "Vendor Transition Strategy, Confidential." My name appeared throughout the thread. Not as a participant but as a topic. They were discussing me like I was a problem to solve, a piece to move on their chessboard. At the bottom, one line made my blood run cold. "Once she's gone, we'll renegotiate cheaper. The vendor won't have a choice." They'd been planning this for weeks. The email thread was like reading my own obituary written by people who thought I was already dead. Internal messages between Evan, the legal team, and someone from procurement I didn't recognize. The context became clear quickly. Our main technology vendor, Titan Systems, was threatening to end their support contract. It was worth $2 million annually and supported 90% of our operations. Without them, we'd be dead in the water within days. Evan had promised the board he could handle the situation personally. The emails showed his strategy. Remove me from negotiations, then pressure Titan into accepting lower rates. He believed they'd have no choice but to comply once I was gone. Page after page of messages showed how little he understood about vendor relationships. He talked about leverage, market position, and competitive bidding like he was buying office supplies. What Evan didn't realize was that Titan wasn't just our vendor. They were my partners. I'd built that relationship from nothing, spending years earning their trust through crisis after crisis. The final email was from Evan to his father. The Wells problem will be resolved by Friday. Titan will either accept our terms or we'll find someone cheaper. Today was Friday. I was the Wells problem. And Titan's contract renewal deadline was Monday morning. I leaned back in my chair, remembering how the Titan relationship began. It was 8 years ago, during the system crash that nearly killed our company. Their previous account manager had quit, leaving us with a junior tech who didn't understand our setup. I'd spent 3 days on the phone with their engineers, walking through every configuration, every custom modification we needed. When their system updates caused conflicts with our database, I worked until 2 a.m. helping their team find solutions. During the security breach 2 years later, I was the one who coordinated the emergency response. While executives panicked in meetings, I was on conference calls with Titan's security team, implementing patches and monitoring threats in real time. When budget cuts threatened to reduce our service level, I'd negotiated a creative payment structure that saved us 30% while giving Titan guaranteed long-term revenue. These weren't just business transactions. They were relationships built on trust, competence, and mutual respect. I'd earned credibility with people who didn't give it easily. The contract wasn't just technical specifications and pricing. It was personal. Titan's team trusted me to understand their constraints and communicate our needs clearly. Evan thought he could replace 15 years of relationship building with spreadsheets and aggressive negotiations. He was about to learn the difference between contracts and trust. While I was processing my firing, Evan was celebrating. My former colleague Amy texted me screenshots of his company-wide email sent an hour after security escorted me out. "Team, today marks the beginning of a new chapter for our department," his message began. "We've made some difficult but necessary changes to ensure we're positioned for success." The email went on about fresh leadership, innovative approaches, and moving beyond outdated methods. He never mentioned my name, but everyone knew who he meant by outdated methods. Amy's text included another detail. Evan had scheduled a conference call with Titan Systems for Monday morning. He'd sent calendar invites to the legal team, procurement, and himself. No technical staff. No one who actually understood our systems. According to Amy, he'd been telling people all afternoon that vendor negotiations were simple business transactions that had been overcomplicated by emotional attachments. He planned to present Titan with 3 options: accept reduced rates, provide the same service for less money, or lose the contract to competitors. What Evan didn't know was that our contract with Titan included an escalation clause I'd negotiated years earlier. Any major changes to terms or personnel required approval from designated technical authorities. My name was written into that clause as the primary authority. Monday morning arrived like a storm I could see coming but couldn't stop. Amy texted me live updates from the office as Evan's call with Titan began. The call started with polite introductions. Evan presented himself as the new decision-maker, explained that previous arrangements were being restructured, and launched into his prepared speech about market rates and competitive pricing. Titan's response was professional but cold. They acknowledged his position, listened to his proposals, then asked a series of technical questions about implementation timelines and system compatibility. Evan couldn't answer any of them. When he tried to redirect the conversation back to pricing, Titan's project manager, Daniel Park, interrupted with one simple question. "Is Patricia Wells present on this call?" According to Amy, Evan froze. The conference room went silent. Legal counsel shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. "Patricia is no longer with the company," Evan finally replied. "I see," Daniel said. "And who will be assuming her technical authority responsibilities?" Evan's answer was confident and completely wrong. All responsibilities have been transitioned to my oversight. The call ended 10 minutes later with Titan requesting additional documentation before proceeding with any negotiations. Daniel Park was already reaching for his phone to call me directly. My phone rang at 11:47 a.m. Unknown number, but somehow I knew exactly who it was before answering. "Patricia, this is Daniel Park from Titan Systems." His voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. "We just finished a very interesting call with your former employer." I'd worked with Daniel for 6 years. He was direct, fair, and didn't waste time on corporate games. If he was calling me personally, the situation was serious. "I heard I was no longer with the company," I said carefully. "So we gathered." What we didn't hear was any explanation of how technical oversight would be maintained during transition periods. Daniel paused. "Patricia, you know our compliance requirements better than anyone. This isn't just about contract terms." He was right. Titan worked with government and healthcare clients. Their security standards required designated authorities for any system changes. Those authorities had to be certified, documented, and available for audits. "They terminated my employment Friday afternoon," I said. "No transition period, no documentation transfer." Daniel was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something more serious. "Patricia, we need to talk. Privately. Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon?" Something in his voice told me this conversation was about to change everything. The coffee shop was neutral territory, far from corporate offices and listening ears. Daniel arrived with a leather folder and the kind of serious expression that meant lawyers had been consulted. "I'll be direct," he said after we sat down. "Your termination creates a significant compliance problem for both companies." He opened the folder and pulled out a copy of our service agreement. Pages of technical specifications, pricing structures, and legal clauses I'd helped negotiate over the years. "Section 12, subsection C," Daniel said, pointing to a paragraph I'd nearly forgotten about. "Designated technical authorities for implementation oversight. Your name is listed as the primary contact for all security and integration approvals." I read the clause again, memories flooding back. We'd added this language after a compliance audit 3 years ago. It protected both companies by ensuring qualified personnel oversaw sensitive operations. "Without your formal sign-off, we legally cannot continue providing services," Daniel continued. "Any changes to personnel in designated roles require 60 days notice and replacement certification." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Evan hadn't just fired me carelessly. He'd fired me illegally, at least in terms of our vendor agreement. "The company is already in breach," Daniel said quietly. "They terminated a designated authority without following contractual procedures." I stared at the document, understanding why Daniel had called this meeting. "What happens now?" I asked. His answer was simple. "That depends on what you want to happen." Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper despite the empty coffee shop around us. "Titan could pursue breach of contract immediately," he said. "We'd be within our rights to suspend services today and demand penalty payments." The thought of Evan facing that kind of crisis made something dark and satisfied stir in my chest. But satisfaction faded quickly, replaced by something more important. Principle. "I don't want to hurt the company out of spite," I said. "There are good people there who don't deserve to suffer because of Evan's mistakes." Daniel nodded like he'd expected this response. What if there was another option? Something cleaner, legal, and fair to everyone involved. He pulled out another document. A simple consulting agreement template. "Titan needs a certified technical authority to maintain compliance," he explained. "You're already qualified, already familiar with the systems. You could work as an independent contractor directly with us to ensure smooth operations during the transition period." It was elegant in its simplicity. I wouldn't be working for my former company, so there was no conflict of interest. I'd be working for Titan, providing the expertise required by our existing contract. The company would still have to renegotiate their agreement, Daniel continued. But services would continue, jobs would be protected, and compliance requirements would be met. I looked at the consulting agreement, seeing a path forward that didn't require revenge or destruction. They'd have to acknowledge my authority, I said. Daniel smiled. They'd have no choice. That evening, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found my original employment agreement. 15 pages of legal language I'd signed without much thought when I was desperate for steady work. Most of it was standard corporate boilerplate. Confidentiality clauses, intellectual property assignments, termination procedures. But buried on page 11 was a paragraph I'd completely forgotten about. Vendor relationships and technical certifications developed independently by the employee remain personal professional assets, unless formally reassigned through documented company procedures. I read it 3 times before the implications sank in. The relationships I'd built with Titan, the certifications I'd earned, the technical expertise I'd developed. None of it had been formally transferred to the company. They were still mine. Evan had fired me without reading the fine print. In his rush to remove me from negotiations, he'd failed to secure the assets he was trying to control. My phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Legal team working late tonight. Lots of stressed faces and closed-door meetings. They were figuring it out. Someone had finally read the Titan contract carefully enough to understand what Evan had done. By tomorrow they'd realize their mistake. But by then it would be too late to fix it quietly. Tuesday morning brought chaos to my former workplace. Amy's text started early. Systems down in 3 departments. Titan not responding to service tickets. The cascade failure had begun. Without proper technical oversight, routine maintenance requests were being ignored. Software updates were delayed. Security patches weren't being implemented. Evan was running between meetings. His confident smirk replaced by something closer to panic. The legal team had clearly explained the situation to him overnight. He keeps saying everything is under control, Amy texted. But his hands are shaking during every conversation. By noon, the board had scheduled an emergency meeting. The agenda was simple. Vendor relations crisis. Immediate action required. Meanwhile, I was reviewing Daniel's consulting agreement one more time before signing. The terms were straightforward. I'd serve as technical liaison between Titan and any of their clients requiring certified oversight. Payment would be directly from Titan, not the company. It was completely legal, completely ethical, and would completely solve the compliance problem Evan had created. I signed the agreement and scanned it back to Daniel. 20 minutes later, he called to confirm receipt. We'll notify the company this afternoon, he said. Official letter, copied to their legal department and board of directors. The letter would be professional, factual, and devastating to Evan's credibility. The consulting agreement was signed by 2 p.m. By 3 p.m., Daniel had drafted Titan's official notification to the company. He read it to me over the phone before sending. Dear management team, it began. Recent personnel changes have created compliance gaps in our service agreement that require immediate resolution. The letter explained the technical authority requirements, referenced specific contract clauses, and announced that services would continue under modified oversight procedures. My name appeared prominently as the designated compliance consultant. All technical decisions, system modifications, and security implementations must be approved through the certified authority as specified in Section 12 of our existing agreement, the letter continued. The final paragraph was the most important. These procedures are effective immediately and non-negotiable. Any attempts to circumvent established protocols will result in service suspension and contract review. Daniel sent copies to Evan, the legal department, the board of directors, and the company president. There was no ambiguity about what had happened or what came next. My phone rang 15 minutes after the letter was sent. Evan's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. Evan's voicemail was 3 minutes of barely controlled desperation wrapped in corporate speak. He mentioned misunderstandings, clearing the air, and finding mutually beneficial solutions. What he didn't mention was an apology. I deleted the message and called my attorney instead. If Evan wanted to communicate, he could do it through proper channels with proper documentation. Amy's updates continued throughout the afternoon. Evan stormed into legal demanding answers. Someone asked him, "Didn't you fire her?" The room went completely quiet. By 4 p.m., the reality had settled over the company like fog. They needed me to approve any technical changes. I was no longer their employee, and I was working directly with their most critical vendor. Evan called me 2 more times. Both went to voicemail. Both messages were deleted without being played. At 5:30 p.m., my attorney called back. I'd explained the situation briefly, sent him copies of all relevant documents. His advice was simple: don't talk to them directly. Everything goes through me now. The power dynamic had shifted completely. 15 hours ago, I'd been publicly humiliated and escorted out by security. Now they needed my permission for their systems to function. The reversal was so complete it felt surreal. Wednesday brought escalation. Evan's father, the department director, requested a meeting with me directly. His assistant called twice, each time more urgent than the last. "Mr. Cole would appreciate a few minutes to discuss the current situation," she said during the second call. I gave her my attorney's number. An hour later, my attorney called back. "They want to meet. The director, their legal counsel, and someone from the board. They're offering to clarify the circumstances of your termination." Clarify. Not apologize. Not reverse. Clarify. "What do you think?" Yes. "I think they're scared," he replied. "But meeting might be productive. You hold all the cards now." We scheduled the meeting for Thursday afternoon. Neutral location, my attorney's office. Their team could present their position, but everything would be documented and recorded. Meanwhile, Titan systems continued running under my remote oversight. I approved security updates from my home office, reviewed system logs through secure connections, and coordinated with their technical teams through encrypted channels. The work was familiar, efficient, and completely independent of company politics. For the first time in years, I was doing technical work without dealing with meetings, presentations, or performance reviews. Just pure problem-solving and system optimization. It reminded me why I'd loved this job before Evan made it unbearable. Thursday's meeting was professional theater. The director, his legal counsel, and a board member I'd never met sat across from me and my attorney in a conference room that smelled like leather and coffee. The director looked older than I remembered. Tired. He'd built this company over 20 years, and now his son's mistakes were threatening everything he'd worked for. "Patricia," he began, his voice careful and measured, "we may have handled your transition improperly." Transition. Not firing. Not humiliation. Transition. "We'd like to discuss bringing you back in a consulting capacity," the legal counsel added. "Perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." My attorney leaned forward. "My client is already consulting with Titan Systems directly." The board member, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, spoke for the first time. "We understand there may have been communication issues with how the personnel change was implemented." Communication issues. That's what they called public humiliation now. The director finally asked the question everyone was avoiding. "Patricia, what would it take to restore normal vendor relations?" I looked across the table at 3 people who had the power to stop Evan's behavior, but had chosen not to until it threatened their bottom line. "That's not up to me anymore," I said quietly. "I work for Titan now." After we left the meeting, my attorney and I walked to a nearby cafe. He was satisfied with how things had gone, but I felt hollow. "They offered you everything except what matters most," he said over coffee. An apology. Acknowledgement of what actually happened. He was right. They danced around the issue, used euphemisms and corporate speak to avoid saying the simple truth. Evan had fired me cruelly and illegally, and they were sorry it happened. But Thursday evening brought unexpected news. Amy texted me a screenshot of an internal email from HR. The company is conducting a review of recent personnel decisions and management practices. All employees are invited to submit confidential feedback regarding leadership effectiveness and workplace conduct. The floodgates had opened. 15 years of Evan's arrogance, favoritism, and poor decisions were about to be documented officially. Amy followed up with more details. 3 people already filed complaints today. Someone mentioned the time Evan made jokes about older employees being dead weight. Another person reported him saying women were too emotional for strategic roles. The pattern was becoming clear. My public firing wasn't an isolated incident. It was the latest example of behavior the company had ignored until it became too expensive to overlook. By Friday morning, 7 formal complaints had been filed. The board scheduled another emergency meeting. The emergency board meeting lasted 4 hours. Amy couldn't get details, but the results were obvious. Evan was removed from all vendor negotiations effective immediately. I learned this when Daniel called Friday afternoon. We received notice that a new negotiation team will be contacting us Monday, he said. The board specifically requested that all communications go through you as technical authority. The irony was perfect. They'd fired me to remove me from negotiations. Now they needed me to make negotiations possible. Monday's call was scheduled for 2 p.m. The company's team would include the director, legal counsel, the board member from Thursday's meeting, and their new interim department manager. No Evan. They want to discuss contract renewal terms, Daniel continued. But they understand all technical specifications need your approval. I'd be joining the call not as their employee, but as Titan's representative. The power dynamic couldn't have been more different from my last meeting in that conference room. Patricia, Daniel added, they're going to ask you to consider returning full-time. Titan's preference is that you remain independent, but we'll support whatever decision you make. I already knew my answer, but I wanted them to ask properly. Monday's negotiation call was a masterclass in corporate humility. The company's team was polite, respectful, and desperate to avoid further conflict. The director opened by acknowledging past communication challenges and expressing commitment to more collaborative relationships moving forward. Still no direct apology, but the shift in tone was unmistakable. The contract terms they proposed were generous. 15% increase in service fees, expanded scope of work, and enhanced support levels. Everything they'd refused to consider when Evan was demanding cuts. More importantly, they specifically requested that I be named as permanent technical authority with expanded oversight responsibilities. We recognize Patricia's expertise is irreplaceable, the board member said. We hope she'll consider a consulting arrangement that benefits everyone. After the call ended, Daniel and I discussed next steps. Titan was willing to restructure the contract to include my expanded role, but my status would remain independent consultant, not company employee. You'd be working with them, not for them, Daniel explained. Contracted through Titan, accountable to our standards, protected by our policies. The arrangement would pay significantly more than my previous salary while eliminating the office politics that had made my job unbearable. Best of all, I'd never have to report to Evan again. The new contract was signed Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Evan was called into HR for his formal review. Amy texted me updates throughout the day. Closed-door meeting with HR and legal. Evan went in looking confident, came out looking sick. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Evan was escorted to his office to pack his personal belongings. They're calling it voluntary resignation pending investigation, Amy reported. But everyone knows what really happened. The investigation would review his decision-making, personnel management, and the circumstances around my termination. More importantly, it would examine whether his actions had created legal liability for the company. The answer was obvious to everyone except Evan. Thursday morning brought the official announcement. Effective immediately, Evan Cole has resigned his position to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. Corporate speak for. We fired him before he could cause more damage. The interim manager who replaced him was Claire Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd been passed over when Evan was promoted. Her first act was sending me a personal email. "Patricia, I want you to know how sorry I am about what happened. It should never have been handled that way. I hope we can work together professionally going forward." Finally, someone had apologized. Claire's apology was the first genuine acknowledgement I'd received from anyone at the company. It meant more than the new contract, the increased pay, or even Evan's resignation. Over the following weeks, I settled into my new role as independent technical consultant. The work was identical to what I'd done before, but the context was completely different. Instead of endless meetings about budget cuts and personnel decisions, I focused on technical problems and system improvements. Instead of political maneuvering and corporate games, I dealt with engineering challenges and client requirements. The stress I hadn't realized I was carrying began to fade. I slept better. I enjoyed my work again. I remembered why I'd chosen this career in the first place. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Claire called to ask if I'd consider returning as a full-time employee. "We'd like to offer you Evan's former position," she said. "Department head, full management authority, significant salary increase." The offer was tempting. It would be satisfying to return to the same conference room where I'd been humiliated, now as the person in charge. But satisfaction isn't the same as happiness. "I appreciate the offer," I told Claire. "But I'm content with the current arrangement." I'd learned something important. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be owned by the people who tried to destroy you. Instead of returning to corporate life, I accepted a senior advisory position with Titan Systems. The role was flexible, autonomous, and focused on what I did best: solving technical problems for clients who valued expertise. Daniel offered me the position during a call in late November. "We're expanding our consulting division," he explained. "We need someone who understands both technical requirements and client relationships. Someone who knows how to build trust with difficult personalities." The job would involve working with multiple clients, not just my former company. Larger projects, more interesting challenges, and complete independence from office politics. "You'd be working with defense contractors, healthcare systems, and government agencies," Daniel continued. "All clients who value competence over corporate games." I accepted immediately. The following Monday, I cleaned out my home office setup and prepared to work from Titan's regional headquarters. No cubicles, no corporate meetings, no performance reviews. Just me, interesting problems, and clients who understood the difference between price and value. My former company remained a client, but now I worked with them the same way I worked with everyone else. Professionally, efficiently, and on my terms. By December, the changes at my former company were visible throughout the organization. Claire had implemented new policies on workplace conduct, professional communication, and personnel management. A company-wide memo stressed mutual respect, collaborative decision-making, and zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior. My name was never mentioned, but everyone understood why these policies existed. Amy, who'd been promoted to senior analyst in the reorganization, forwarded me the memo with a simple message: "Things are different now. Better." The technical systems I'd helped design were running smoothly under the new contract. Projects were completed on schedule, security issues were resolved quickly, and client relationships remained strong. Most importantly, the people who'd watched my humiliation in that conference room now saw a different model of leadership. Problems could be solved without cruelty. Changes could be implemented without public shaming. Success didn't require making other people fail. It was a quiet victory, but sometimes quiet victories are the most lasting ones. Claire sent me a holiday card in December with a handwritten note. "Thank you for handling everything with such grace. You showed us what professionalism really looks like." The final chapter of this story arrived in January, 6 months after my public firing. An email from Evan appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Closure." The message was short, bitter, and completely predictable. "Patricia, I hope you're satisfied with the outcome. You got what you wanted, me gone, the company apologizing, everyone treating you like some kind of hero. I made a mistake in how I handled things, but destroying my career wasn't necessary. Some of us have to live with the consequences of other people's choices. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Evan still didn't understand what had actually happened. He thought this was about revenge, about me winning and him losing. He couldn't see that his downfall had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own actions. I hadn't destroyed his career. I'd simply refused to let him destroy mine. The difference was important, even if he'd never understand it. 2 weeks later, Amy mentioned that Evan had found a job with a small consulting firm in another state. Probably better for everyone, she said. I agreed. Sometimes people need fresh starts in places where their reputations haven't preceded them. I wished him well, genuinely. Holding on to anger would have hurt me more than it hurt him. Looking back, the lesson seems obvious. Power doesn't come from titles, authority, or the ability to humiliate others. Real power comes from competence, relationships, and documentation. Evan thought firing me publicly would demonstrate his authority and eliminate a threat to his control. Instead, it revealed that he'd never understood what made the company successful in the first place. The vendor relationships weren't owned by the company. They were built and maintained by people. The technical expertise wasn't replaceable. It was earned through years of problem-solving and crisis management. The trust wasn't automatic. It had to be demonstrated repeatedly through actions, not words. When Evan fired me, he thought he was removing an obstacle. Actually, he was removing the foundation. I wasn't fired into unemployment. I was fired into independence. The humiliation he intended to break me with became the catalyst for something better. Work without politics, respect without pleading, success on my own terms. 6 months later, I was earning more money, working on more interesting projects, and sleeping better than I had in years. The company was paying higher fees for services they'd previously taken for granted. And Evan was learning that consequences follow actions, even when you're the director's son. The people who tried to diminish me learned something important. Never mistake silence for weakness or patience for powerlessness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. They just haven't decided when to play them yet.